The Sigma 105mm 1.4 art lens for the Canon EF mount is one of my favorite lenses of all time, and I brought a long lost friend of mine, Rachel, to model for me and to show off why that is. Got the Sigma 105 1.4 in my hands, and it feels like a lovely piece of machinery. It has this matte finish on the back that's black, but it also has a glossy finish that's black on the front. Now, one thing that's different about a lot of the Sigma art lenses and the contemporary lenses is that a lot of that satin tends to scratch, but since they used so little satin on the real estate of this lens, I don't get any scratches, which means I can sell it a lot easier, and it's a 105 1.4. It's one of the only lenses of its time. Holding it in my hands, it really is a hefty thing, but it's really compact. It feels like when you get your first burrito from Chipotle. That's how it feels. Like, how is all of this gonna work out? But it works perfectly fine. One thing that makes it really good is it's a prime lens. I don't have to necessarily worry about zooming in and zooming out, so my hand is not going to be on the lens all that much unless I'm doing video or overriding the focus. It doesn't have image stabilization here. It has an autofocus manual focus button, but that massive front element, that's probably one of the biggest front elements you will ever see on a camera lens. It is a massive 105 millimeters on this thread here for the front end of this lens. So if you're getting any kind of filters, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg to put on the front of this. I would recommend you get a drop-in filter adapter, just like I have, and use that, because that's going to save you a lot of money on lens filters here. But other than that, it feels great. It's heavy. It's a 105 1.4. So that means it's going to let a lot of light in, but a lot of light involves a lot of glass to truck that light into the camera. So it's going to be a little hefty. It is not the most heaviest lens, but it definitely will off balance your camera. So with that said, you got to come ready. Now you have a lens collar here at the bottom, a lens collar that you can actually detach. Not all lenses can detach their lens collar. So it has a little remove part. You just line up all the lines, pull it off, and you can now get this annoying little collar out of the way. It's a little annoying for this lens, not as annoying as the lens collar from the 70-200 2.8 RF lens, but annoying nonetheless, because this lens is not the heaviest lens. If you were to use the reciprocal rule, it's at 105 millimeters, so that means you would go to like 1/125th of a second. With it being such a fast lens, the reciprocal rule shouldn't be an issue, especially since you don't have stabilization. But you can take off the lens collar, so you don't necessarily need the tripod. You can actually walk around with this, but this is an amazing lens. Canon doesn't have, if not, I don't think Canon has any 105 1.4s that are modern. Sigma made their art lenses right before Canon made their RF mount, and they made them to last. They made them to be works of art, and that's really what they are. We need to go through this thing and test out this lens, but it feels good in the hands. It works. You won't accidentally knock a button. You won't accidentally knock a RF control ring. And this is probably one of the best lenses ever made by Sigma, and I love it. It's one of my favorite lenses of all time. Now, I couldn't just have the 105mm f 1.4 in this battle all by itself. I really have to have some kind of companion, and I decided to rent the 70-200 2.8 L lens for the RF mount body. Now, this is a very interesting matchup. I'm actually learning just as much as you are, guys, but you might say to yourself, well, one's a zoom lens, one's a prime lens, it's not equal. Yes, you're right, but for those of us who know how to use the prime lens, can use it in a fashion which gets us better images than the zoom lens. Zoom lenses tend to have more optical issues than the prime lenses, and if I'm in the right spot at the right time and I know when to use that 105mm 1.4, then this could be just as useful for me as the 70-200 2.8, depending on what kind of work I'm doing. If I'm doing portrait work, I'm never going to need a zoom lens to do portrait work. I can pretty much do all my portraits with one lens, and that would be the 105 1.4 if I had one. But the conundrum comes into place where, the 70-200 has 105 millimeters at 2.8, but 2.8 is dramatically darker than 1.4, and you get dramatically less background blur. Well, so I thought. Well, the minimum focusing distances of both these lenses are very, very similar. And with a 70-200 at 200, you can get a lot closer to your subject, giving you a bit more compression. But on the backhand, I found that, especially with this image, that you can throw a lot of things out of focus that you didn't think you would. At the end of the day, shooting with the RF 70-200 2.8 lens this close is unusual, but I don't really know how to feel about it. Let's try a version like this with the 1.4 lens. Now, looking at this image coming from the 105 1.4 at its minimum focusing distance, I like this image a lot better as far as how the public would think about it. Like if I were to take this picture and she needed this for like a modeling comp card or some kind of modeling website, I would like this picture a little bit more for most audience, like most harsh critics and judges, because her head is turned, but most of her head is close to the plane of focus, what I focused on, which was the eye closest to the camera. Since she turned her head, her facial features are closer, like her jawline, her neckline, her body. All those facial features and all those body features are closest to the plane of focus. So the amount of focus fall off, or things that are in focus that fall off from the plane of focus, it's much more acceptable. It's not like randomly throwing your fingers up and your fingers are not in focus but your eye is, that kind of thing. And even though both of these pictures I really like, I really had to stop and think about it from a judgment perspective, because we're not just taking these pictures for ourselves creatively, we're also taking it for the people who are licensing the pictures to utilize for whatever they're using them for. And when it comes to like portraits, modeling, and things get kind of stiff when it comes to judgment and critiques and criticism. So you really have to put all that stuff into your mindset when you're taking pictures, and you do have this power to shoot at 1.4, 1.2, sometimes f1. In Nikon world, you can shoot all the way as fast as 0.95 on one of those lenses that they just brought out at 50 millimeters. So you have to take all this into consideration and do your best to not miss focus, and probably use only lenses that work well on those camera bodies. Here's another image that I really, really love. It's one of my favorite images of all time. Shot with the same kind of close-up, minimum focusing distance on a lens that's modern, that has a wide aperture. I can't say enough about that 105mm 1.4 Sigma art lens. And yes, I might be biased because this is my favorite lens in the world, but I did tell you the things that were bad about the lens. The lens is not as sharp as the 70-200 2.8 at 2.8 from the RF mount, but at the same time, the 105mm 1.4 lens is a older lens. It has older optics on it. There was no such thing as Canon full frame mirrorless bodies when the 105mm 1.4 Sigma art lens came out for the EF mount. And so you have to weigh all of that in there. But at the same time, if I were to choose one of these two lenses, the 105mm is actually cheaper than the 70-200 RF lens, and I'll probably go with the 105mm lens because I just like the background blur, the amount of light you can let in. And speaking of build quality, the build quality just seems a little bit sturdier on the Sigma lens over the Canon 70-200. Also, when they designed the Canon 70-200, it feels like Canon rushed the design of it because of the RF mount. Now, when you look at the 70-200, you have all of these things you can touch. You can touch the zoom ring, you can touch the focus ring, but you can also touch that useless RF control ring. And it's put in a way that pushes it all the way to the back of the lens, and then you have to reach to get it, and then the collar gets in the way. It's a big mess on the 70-200, and it just feels like Canon rushed the design. It comes out of the lens body, which means it's susceptible to more dust getting into it because a lot more things are exposed around the barrel of the lens, and it becomes a nightmare with the 70-200, and then it costs so much more for not much more, if that makes sense. You can get a 70-200 EF version Mark III, and it does a lot of the same things for almost half the price. Not half the price, but you don't have to pay as much. Alright, we're back in Lightroom just to do a quick lens sharpness test. We have both of the lenses at their maximum apertures at equivalent focal distances. We have the 70-200 RFL lens on the left here, and we have the Sigma 1.4 105 lens on the right here. So let's zoom in. We're at, I think, 300% here. Yep, 300%, and check this out. Wow, the 70-200 is doing a bit better than the Sigma 105-14, but you have to understand the 70-200 is newer. It has newer technology, and it's just designed specifically for Canon. This is a Sigma lens designed for Canon. They don't remotely have the time advantage or the technology advantage, and they're doing quite a great job at a maximum aperture of f1.4. That's something the Canon 70-200 can't do, and Canon doesn't have any lenses at 105 at 1.4 as of making this video that I know of. If anybody knows a 105 1.4 that Canon has made, please let me know. I'm pretty sure it will be a lot of money even to this day, but they definitely don't have one for the RF mount on the RF body, so I have to adapt the Sigma EF to my RF or R body Canon R5. Now let's go to the corners to see exactly how they resolve. And I need to make a side note here. The 70-200 images are at ISO 1000, whereas the Sigma images are at 320 ISO. So you're going to see a little bit more noise in here, but we're not judging these for noise. We're judging them from sharpness. Now ISO can degrade sharpness, so just assume the especially here in the corners that the 70-200 is a little bit sharper just because of the effect of ISO. I didn't have enough time, and I wasn't in the right specific spot to line these all up, but I'm getting better at lens charts as I go. But this is quite the showing for the 105 1.4 with all that being considered. Here in the corners, it seems to be resolving almost as good as the 70-200 RFL lens. So all in all, guys, I really think this is a great lens, the Sigma 105mm 1.4 EF from Sigma that goes onto your Canon body, of course. And as long as you have an adapter, and that's only like $100 at the cheapest, and what, I want to say $1,200 to $1,400, you can get the image quality that rivals the 70-200 RF lens and not think twice about it. Especially if you're doing portraits. You don't need all this sharpness in the middle if you're doing portraits, because a lot of people don't want to see all that detail. But we know optically it's pretty straight, so you're not going to see a lot of chromatic aberration. You're not going to see too much vignetting, and so all the other optical defects that you might see in an image, you won't see that with the Sigma 105mm 1.4, which means that the lack of sharpness can really be to your advantage. Now, if you had lack of sharpness, a bunch load of chromatic aberrations and vignetting and all this other stuff, and the stuff won't focusing, then that will be an issue. Like pick a struggle, right? So, but no, Sigma did a great job with this 105 1.4, and unlike a lot of Sigma lenses in the past where they did have all those issues, the art lenses tend to not have those issues as much, and 105 1.4 is definitely one to take home. I'm Devin with CFX Studios, and stay tuned for the next video.